answer this question to make clear the distinctions as you are talking in terms of UAPs as well as any astrobiology work that we do.
I would start by saying one of NASA's big questions is there life out there, right? And a lot of what NASA's doing in its exploration of the solar system and beyond is focused on searching for life in any form, extraterrestrial life. I think one of the things we have learned in the past 20 years is planets are common. We knew, of course, about the planets in our solar system, but we now know there are lots of planets out there. So there are lots of potential environments for life. And I think one of the most fascinating questions is, do any of those planets host life? And that's something that NASA is trying to address in a host of different ways. Whether it's probes that are landing on planets or designing missions that will look for signatures of life around other planets. So the search for life is a really important theme. We haven't found life beyond Earth yet, right? I mean, let's be clear about this. We haven't found it yet. But we're looking, and we're looking for it in lots of different ways. And, you know, David was discussing technosignatures as one way that we can look both within our solar system and beyond. And there's a lot of different elements, I think, of this potential search. And you know, this to go back to something sort of that was phrased in an earlier question, you know, is NASA hiding anything about this? No. This is actually what, you know, answering this question is one of the things that NASA as an agency is excited about. It's something that lots of scientists working with NASA are excited about is this question of, is there life out there? You know, and I think one of the things that makes this question of are we alone such a central question, not just to the scientific community, it's a central question, I think, for the public. I suspect there are more people watching this than the typical episode of NASA TV, right? And this is something where we will have media coming to the press conference because these questions touch on something that I think is really a deep question for humanity is, are we alone in the universe?
Yeah, just to kind of echo what David said a bit. I mean, obviously, this is something we think a lot about in astrobiology. What if we succeed? We are very driven to try to find real evidence of extraterrestrial life, and we would be highly driven to share that if we found it. Because everyone wants to show that they've been able to succeed in what they're trying to do. And you know, one perhaps illustrative example is to think about what happened when we came close, when NASA thought maybe they had discovered extraterrestrial life. And a big event, actually, in the history of astrobiology was in the 1990s when some scientists had thought that they had discovered fossils in a meteorite that came from Mars. And what happens is you don't announce it immediately. You make sure that you try to make sure you're right, because you don't want to have false alarms and announce something and then you go, oops, sorry, we were wrong. That was a mistaken analysis. But what happened was when the scientists were sure they were right, then there was a big, in fact, presidential press conference with President Clinton and NASA, and it was a big public announcement. And that's what would happen. If we discovered something, we would try to make sure we were right, and then we would very proudly and loudly let the public know about it.
Thanks. We have just 1 minute left, so I'll let you finish up.
Yeah, thank you. The only thing I wanted to add, I wouldn't at all liken it to alien or extraterrestrial life, but in astrobiology and exobiology, there is the exploration of our planet as an analog for what might be found on other worlds, and what is extreme cold, what is extreme heat, a volcano, a black smoker at the bottom of the ocean, what lives there, and how is that even possible, and things we still discover throughout our ocean might look alien to a lot of people, right? And we keep discovering new species of different things, whether they be microbes or algae or, charismatic megafauna, whatever they are. But there are synergies. I know there was an initiative years ago at NASA called Oceans Across the Solar System, and the idea was, could our own Earth's ocean be used and the life within it as an analog for what might be discovered elsewhere? So I think that's an example of a potential synergy of interdisciplinary science, research, observations, etc., collection of data and information gathering that could be useful in the future.
Thank you all so much. I will hand it back to David Spergel, your chair.
So let me also just answer the one other piece of that question was, what do you do if you see something surprising? Like, where do you report? And this is something where, just to come back to something I mentioned in my opening remarks, the AARO is our lead agency for UAPs. And while we've talked about life in this context, most UAPs, I think when one looks at the data in more detail, are going to turn out to be phenomena we understand. We saw this with some of the balloons or commercial jets. We saw those examples. Some UAPs, and we saw this with the Chinese balloon that flew over, is an issue sometimes of national security. So we actually do want to encourage people, just from that angle, to report it. So, just before we'll transition to summary, but just want to add on that question, that, to keep in mind that, the AARO's role is to be the prime source for understanding those things. And what our charge is to think about what's NASA's role. And I think NASA, and this is something, I want to now go back to discussion. We didn't have that much time for it. Just to come back to, what we see as NASA's role in this. I think one piece we've talked about is NASA can help remove the stigma. NASA can draw more of the scientific community in. And I think what NASA can help do is provide standards of high data quality. I think one of the things that many of us who've not looked at this before, I'd certainly put myself in this group, was struck by the limited nature of the data, that many events had insufficient data, and that in order to get a better understanding, we will need to have high quality data where we understand its provenance, data from multiple sensors. And I think one of the things that's, even from the same sensor, as we saw, in Josh's analysis, also in the event Sean showed us, when you can observe event over time and get velocity information, that gives you a lot of additional information. So we're going to want things with high frame rate. We're going to want things from multiple perspectives. So I think those are all going to be pieces of things that we want to think about. I think this is an opportunity for citizen science. I think if we can come up with recommendations in our roadmap that point to ways in which we can people can collect data. I remain a big fan of these things. They do take over our lives too much, but they are fabulous data collectors and I don't know, there's something like 3-4 billion of them that are on the planet, and NASA, I think, has the prestige and visibility to develop an app or work with companies to develop apps that could collect data in a uniform and centralized way that I think will, most of the stuff that's collected is going to turn out to be commercial planes, balloons. When you have multiple cameras, you can eliminate some of the optical limitations of ghosting and those effects. Some of them will almost certainly